Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Sorry for the slightly late start. I think we're not the only people in the last 4 or 6 weeks to have some technological problems, but they seem to have been resolved. So welcome to our webinar on COVID-19, record clearing in the age of COVID-19. I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy during these very weird times. My name is Janet Ginzberg. I am a senior staff attorney at Community Legal Services in Philadelphia. And for those of you who are not aware, CLS runs a program called the National Record Clearing Project with funding from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. I just want to say a very brief intro, talk about why we feel that this topic is timely and important, even or perhaps because of the pandemic. For the past 2 years, we've run a pre-conference for the Equal Justice Works NLADA conference, and our pre-conferences have been very well attended. We planned to be in Atlanta next week. Some of you may have planned on being there with us to give another record clearing pre-conference session. That conference, like so many others, was obviously canceled. And you know, at first we just thought, okay, well, that's really too bad that the conference was canceled. We were really bummed. And then we just did what so many people are doing during this pandemic, and we just pivoted. And we decided to switch the sessions that we were going to give as part of the conference into a series of 5 webinars, starting with today and over the next 5 weeks. But this first one was changed. You know, we had just this second of thinking that record clearing would have to be put on the back burner during this economic calamity. But we realized just how important, even more so than ever, having clean records is for people who are trying to find work amongst what is already and is going to be extraordinarily high unemployment. So at the same time as realizing how important all of our work remains, with courts closed and systems shut down, we've all faced significant challenges in getting record clearing accomplished. So what we wanted to do with this webinar was to explore some of the challenges faced by practitioners in the record clearing world during COVID-19, and to find ways to move forward with the courts and with our practices, and to keep record clearing forefront in the minds of many people as being really essential to many of our clients. So we're going to be talking a little bit about the procedural challenges that people are facing. We've got some excellent panelists who will be talking later, and also talking about some of the policy reforms, which are as important as ever in this time of recession. So before I introduce our first speaker, I just want to also add, as I mentioned, we're going to be doing these series of sessions, and I hope that you will all join us next week as well on May 6th at 2 o'clock. We're going to be talking about our Clean Slate Screening Project, which has been a model of a remotely run project that combines assistance and technology that has assisted 10,000 people already across the state of Pennsylvania. And we'll talk to you about some of the lessons learned and tips for practitioners who are grappling with the challenges to their practice. I also want to add before let me just add just before we go on to our next speaker, our first speaker, and I give you a little bit of the structure of how this is going to work. At certain points during one part of the session, polls will be coming up, questions will be coming up. We hope that you can all figure out how to respond to the questions. Most of them are yes and no questions, and there is a feature on your screens that will allow you to answer the questions. We just think that it'll help us even get more of a feel across the country of how people are facing this challenge. So our structure today is Rebecca Vallas, who I'll introduce in in the beginning. In a minute, we'll talk first. Then we've got several panelists who will be answering some structured questions. You should all feel free to be asking questions in your chat function, and questions will be fed to me, because the last part of our session will be a question and answer period, where hopefully we'll be able to answer as many questions that you have as we can. And you can feel free to direct your questions to a particular person or to the group as a whole. This webinar will be about an hour, give or take some, but we've allotted as much time as we need, we think, for questions and answers. So our first speaker, I'd like to welcome Rebecca Vallas. Rebecca is Managing Director of the Poverty to Prosperity Program at the Center for American Progress. She leads their anti-poverty development and manages the team's policy and advocacy work. I also know Rebecca because she used to be a lawyer with us at Community Legal Services, where she'd worked on, Rebecca, what'd you do? SSI at CLS, right? She had worked on SSI and also has done a lot of criminal record clearing legislative initiatives that we've worked with her on. So I will mute myself now, and Rebecca, take it away.
Thanks so much. It's a real pleasure to be with this group today. I'm one of the many people experiencing ongoing and it seems permanent technical issues. So bear with me today, and I hope everything works. So I'm really thrilled to be talking about this incredibly important topic, in large part because it is such an incredibly important aspect of the COVID-19 response and isn't getting almost any attention right now. So I just want to extend my gratitude to Community Legal Services and to Kellogg for pulling this together and for making this happen, this series of conversations happen, given how important this is right now. So I'm going to speak a little bit from slides with some help from one of the wizards behind the scenes at CLS. So if I could have my next slide, please. Great. So few people as this group who have dialed in for today's webinar are as well versed as you are when it comes to how widespread the impact of criminal records is. These are numbers you guys could probably rattle off in your sleep, but just to sort of refresh, as we think about the scale of the impact of American exceptionalism when it comes to criminal justice policy, we've got 70 million to 100 million Americans at this point, 1 in 3 of us who now have some type of criminal record. Nearly half of American kids, this might be a somewhat lesser known statistic, have at least one parent who has a criminal record. And obviously the racial disparities have been significant and extend not just to who has been behind bars, but also who has criminal convictions and criminal records. One statistic illustrating that fact, 1 in 3 Black men today now have a felony conviction. Next slide. Similarly, few as you are as well versed when it comes to how and why a criminal record can be a life sentence to poverty, to joblessness. As a quick side note, although I feel like it always bears repeating given the magnitude of the issue when it comes to counting all types of criminal records, felonies obviously carry perhaps the greatest stigma when it comes to employment and other types of building blocks of economic security. But any criminal record, even a misdemeanor, even an arrest that never led to a conviction, any type of record can be a long-term stigma in the digital era. The sort of stats at the ready these days: 9 in 10 employers, 4 in 5 landlords. It's also worth noting 3 in 5 colleges and universities. All of them are basically using background checks to screen applicants. And so what that can mean is that having even a minor old record can result in having your resume thrown in the trash. The sort of famous statistic that comes to us from Diva Pager: job seekers with records are half as likely to get a callback or a job offer. And again, significant racial disparities that further compound these barriers. Next slide, please. So all of that positions us to need to prioritize the group of people who are impacted by the criminal justice system because of the significant economic vulnerability that then stems from all of those barriers that people can face to employment in particular, and that's where I'm going to focus for today's conversation, but also to housing, which can be incredibly important and is incredibly important, particularly in the context of a pandemic that is pushing people in some cases out of their homes because they can't afford rent. So heading into the pandemic, here we are in this moment of what many were starting to hail as the strongest economy we had in some time. When you look at statistics, headline statistics like the unemployment rate, the overall U.S. unemployment rate. But against that backdrop, heading into this pandemic, formerly incarcerated people were facing an unemployment rate of 27%. And that number really, to me, is incredibly salient in this moment, given that we are now hearing economists forecast that we could see unemployment rates overall in this country rise to 30% or higher. So the similarity there is striking. Formerly incarcerated people were already facing what might be the peak of coronavirus pandemic unemployment levels in this country when we had what was this incredibly quote unquote strong economy, at least as measured by unemployment rates overall. Also throwing in a little bit of the housing picture here, formerly incarcerated people were 10 times as likely to experience homelessness heading into the pandemic. Even people who were lucky enough to find well-paying, decent-paying jobs or jobs at all faced a significant earnings disadvantage as well. So an economic impact even for people who end up employed or underemployed. And a few quick other notes, especially in this COVID moment, that feel especially salient. We are talking about a group of workers who are especially likely to have previously lacked health insurance or to now lack health insurance because of layoffs, because of joblessness, because of lack of formal attachment to the traditional labor market as a result of effectively not being well served by the jobs they were looking for, kind of going into other opportunities to raise money, a little bit of the kind of darker labor market. We're also talking about people who are especially unlikely to have much of a financial cushion. And a big part of the picture there, of course, this group is very familiar, is fines and fees, legal financial obligations that in some states can result in wage garnishment and other types of collection schemes that can deprive people of whatever earnings they are able to scrape together. So that's the picture heading into COVID. Now enter COVID, right? We've got workers with records as really a group that are likely to be among those hardest hit by this pandemic and its attendant economic effects. Many workers, as I was saying, with records end up basically turning to gig work or work off the books in odd jobs to make ends meet when they're pushed out of or rejected by the formal labor market. That makes them especially vulnerable to job loss right now, but it also makes them especially unlikely to have basic protections like paid sick days, paid leave, health insurance during this crisis. And I should also note, unemployment insurance may also be something that is less available for these workers. We've now, as of just a couple of days ago, heard from the Congressional Budget Office in DC, the nonpartisan CBO. They are now currently forecasting that the overall U.S. unemployment rate could still be nearly 10%, just under 10% by the end of 2021. If that is the picture we're looking at, that far out, and maybe it's better, maybe it's worse, there is no telling how high the unemployment rate for people with records may be at that point. If it was already 27% pre-pandemic, we were talking about 4%, 3% unemployment overall. And the result for a lot of workers who had managed to move on with their lives, to find decent paying jobs in this moment is they are potentially going to find that they are right back where they started possibly years ago, having their resumes thrown in the trash all over again as they start looking for work anew when jobs do reappear. So with all of that as sort of the lethal cocktail of the existing broken policy landscape that COVID-19 has lain bare in so many ways, but particularly vis-a-vis this group of workers, many advocates for people with records, for justice-involved families and individuals have started to push not just for the important and incredibly urgent steps that states and localities are starting to take to let people out who don't pose a public safety risk and who should be home safely out of the petri dishes that our facilities have become in so many cases that are leading to dangerous conditions for people behind bars. But many advocates are also starting to add to the justice agenda a second chance response agenda as part of the COVID-19 response. And so as we start to think about kind of making that case and why is this part of the COVID response, I've laid out a lot of it. We're talking about a group of people who, during a recession and a recovery, when employers have their pick of workers, people with records are going to be the first fired and also importantly here, the last hired. And if policymakers fail to address these criminal record barriers as part of COVID response, not as an afterthought, not as something to come later, we risk leaving behind about a third of the U.S. workforce and tens of millions of vulnerable families who were already disproportionately economically struggling heading into this crisis. Entire communities will be impacted. We're not just talking about individuals and families, because we could see the same way that we have million-dollar blocks in the mass incarceration context, we could see blocks and whole communities see large numbers of their residents virtually shut out of jobs as the economy starts to turn back on and jobs reappear. So all of this really conspires to make the case for why this must be part and parcel of the COVID agenda, and inaction is simply not something we can afford to consider as an option. What will happen if we don't do this? It won't just be incredible carnage that is preventable for a community that has already been ravaged, and a set of people who have already had their lives in many cases destroyed and upended by mass incarceration and over-criminalization. But we also risk hamstringing the overall U.S. economic recovery. And this is going to be an important message and line of way we think about this and talk about this, particularly given the concerns among state and local lawmakers who don't see any aid coming their way anytime soon and are really, really, really worried about their budgets. And so starting to think about how, what would it mean to shut a third of workers out of the recovery? Is that something that our economy can afford? I would argue, and I think the Center for Economic Policy Research, which produced this statistic years ago in normal economic times, shutting workers with just felony convictions, not even all workers with records, out of the labor market, costs the U.S. economy as much as $87 billion in lost GDP every single year. Imagine what we're talking about in terms of the large-scale impact if we do not allow these workers to return to the labor force alongside others. And on the flip side, and here's sort of the case for those state and local lawmakers, addressing criminal record barriers will actively promote the overall recovery as itself an act of economic stimulus. It will allow people with records in their families not just to move on with their lives and personally benefit and be part of that recovery, but also to turn around and put the money that they are now able to earn right back into their local economies during the recovery. That will be an incredibly important part of how this policy agenda starts to fit in with things that are being thought of as purely economic or health related. And then, of course, businesses are going to need access to a ready and skilled workforce as they recover. That's going to be an important set of alliances and stakeholder as well moving forward, even though we do have this changed labor market and economy. As I said, failure to act really is not something we can afford. And another dimension of this is, of course, the tremendous and harmful racial disparities that already exist in the U.S. when it comes to not only the impacts of the criminal justice system, but also because of this incredibly long sordid history that we, again, American exceptionalism have when it comes to systemic inequities and discrimination, particularly among communities of color, the black-white unemployment rates, that gap, the racial wealth gap. These are all things that will be significantly exacerbated if policymakers fail to act because of the disproportionate impact of our criminal justice system on communities of color. So what is the agenda that advocates are starting to pull together as that second chance response, for lack of a better term? I'm all ears for something catchier. First, obviously, people need to be let out so that, as my friend and colleague Daryl Atkinson has put it, and put it in a panel discussion I was part of last week with him, there's no such thing as a second chance for people who don't survive this pandemic. And it's a grave reminder that letting people out has to be top of that list. list. But then there's a whole slew of policies, many of which are going to be talked about in CLS's webinar agenda today and in the weeks to come, that are the types of policies that we know work for this group of workers and their families, but which we need to see enacted at scale today as part of the COVID response so that people are not left out of the recovery, so that they can access those jobs when they reappear, and so that we don't end up compounding the damage that's already been done by decades of mass incarceration and over-criminalization. So I've listed some of them here. My hope is that many of these, including especially record clearing and fair chance licensing, and there's a whole bunch on here that actually have real potential to be bipartisan. There's also a bunch on here that actually don't cost anything, and which can be done at the state level, at the local level. There's a lot of options here. So I'm going to leave it there. I'm really excited to hear and learn from this next panel, and I really appreciate Community Legal Services and Kellogg for putting this together today. My last slide is slide that, oh, I'm sorry, I've not been telling you to advance my slides. Move through to the end, please. There we go. That's my list of policies. If we can back up one. There we go. And then I've got my contact information at the end, but if we could leave the policies up for a second, because I was bad at telling you when to advance my slides, and I apologize for that. I'll also make these slides available to send around for folks who can spend a little more time with the slides. I didn't focus on with the visuals while I was talking, but thank you, CLS, and I'm really excited to hear from this panel now. Janet, back to you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. It's really interesting to hear sort of, we do know some of those statistics, but it's really puts it in perspective every time, and especially thinking about how COVID is going to exacerbate that. What I'd like to do now is introduce our panelists. The next part of this webinar is more of a practical, on the ground, what have practitioners, at least some the ones who we'll be talking to, but I'd like to hear from all of you through polling as well, what you're all seeing during COVID-19. So I know that Jamie was having some technical issues. I'll introduce her last. So first I would like to introduce Muirne Heaney. She's the Director of Access at Legal Aid of Nebraska. In that capacity, she oversees the office's Clean Slate project. Cynthia Cornelius is Director of Programs at Cabrini Green Legal Aid in Chicago, where she oversees the delivery of legal services and social services in family law, housing, criminal defense, and criminal records. She's been with Cabrini Green since 2012 and has a long, interesting professional history before she went to law school, 30 years before she went to law school before that. So great to see you here. Jamie, can you hear us? Jamie? Okay. Could our wizard behind the wall let Jamie know that we can't hear her, and she says she'll call in? So.
I can. Can you hear?
No, you're really, no. Well, while they're working out that technical glitch.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but very haltingly. Okay, so well, I'll tell people who you are, even though you can't be seen yet. Jamie is a supervising attorney at Community Legal Services in Philadelphia, working with me in the employment unit and also with our Youth Justice Project. She's been at CLS for about 8 years. She had been an intern before then, and focuses on increasing access to education and employment opportunities for youth who have juvenile or criminal records. She also leads CLS's community-based record clearing programs, our clinics and our Clean Slate clearing project that she'll discuss next week in next week's session. So what I'd like to do, let me just first see if Jamie is back on. Jamie, are you back on? Nope. Okay, she may have to call in. So Muirne and Cynthia, let me focus on you first, and then if Jamie's able to join us, she will join us. Just to sort of lay a groundwork for everyone, can you tell us what records can be cleared in your states? Give a sentence or two describing the process. Is it through paper filing, online, are there hearings? Cynthia, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, fine. So I have prepared a document that you'll see in handouts, I guess, for the attendees, if you can see that, but I'll just quickly summarize. Here in Illinois, we have two remedies, expungement and sealing. And on the adult side, that is, expungement is for cases that did not result in a conviction, did not go to court, were dismissed, but also there we have certain types of special probations and sentences that don't lead to conviction. So those generally are eligible for expungement. There are some exceptions. For instance, we will not, our legislature does not allow us to expunge non-conviction sentences for DUI, for example. But other than that, a few exceptions. If it's a non-conviction, we can file a petition to expunge. Convictions may be eligible to be sealed, as sealed records are still accessible by law enforcement, the state's attorney, the courts, and certain employers. But most employers cannot see a record that's sealed. And for convictions, all convictions in Illinois are eligible for sealing except the ones that I have listed on the slide. These would be crimes that involve domestic violence or stalking, DUI, reckless driving, sex offenses other than prostitution and public indecency, and violations of our Humane Care for Animals Act. So other than that, all other convictions are eligible to seal. On the juvenile side, most of our juvenile offenses are eligible for expungement, but all of them are sealed. And they will require a petition if they are eligible for expungement. There are some automatic expungements that are eligible for juvenile records as well. Last year, we also passed the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act, and that created a remedy for special cannabis cases. Dismissed cannabis cases will be automatically expunged. Cannabis convictions of minor cannabis offenses involving the possession of 30 grams or less will be eligible to be automatically processed through our clemency program, our process for clemency, or through motions to vacate and expunge that can be filed either by the individual or by the county state's attorney. There are some provisions also for larger possession of cannabis cases. Up to 500 grams can also be filed as a motion to vacate and expunge. Our process is archaic, to put it kindly. We are paper bound. These petitions are created by paper. They have to be filed in court. The second page of the handout shows you the long process that it takes for our petitions to be handled. The law imposes a 60-day notice period, so nothing happens for 60 days. And after that, a hearing may be held if there is an objection by the state's attorney or some other or one of the other parties. Here in Cook County, where the majority of the cases exist in Illinois, we have a huge backlog because of this long process. So that's where we are pre-COVID.
That was pre-COVID. All right. Okay, Muirne, why don't you tell us a little bit about what was happening in Nebraska pre-COVID?
Well, in Nebraska, we're kind of the Wild West out here, and the prevailing culture is hang 'em high. So if you're a criminal once, you're a criminal. And that's the culture in which we're working. In Nebraska, we've got limited remedies for criminal convictions, and what we call them are set aside. And basically what that is a judicial determination that an individual doesn't present a risk of harm to the public or themselves any longer, and that all of their rights should be restored. However, the record remains public and open to anyone, employers or landlords. They can see it. So the fact of a set aside appears on the record. Whether it does much good is a different question. I frequently recommend that people try and get a set aside as a step to a pardon, because a pardon is one of our cases that can be sealed, and I'll get to that in just a minute. The cases that can be sealed in Nebraska are dismissed criminal charges. I think all of us on the call probably know that a criminal charge is almost as damning to an individual as a criminal conviction. If an employer or a potential landlord sees a criminal charge, they figure where there's smoke, there's fire, and we're not going to hire. So we're able to seal dismissed criminal charges. From a policy standpoint, there is a huge drive in Nebraska to make all juvenile records sealable automatically when a youth leaves the court. But right now, it's supposed to happen automatically when a youth reaches the age of 17. That happens intermittently across our state. Douglas County, which is the largest county in the state, is very good about automatic sealing of records. But prior to this year, only youth who had successfully completed probation could ask the court to seal their records. Now, as a result of last year's legislature, even youth who have not successfully completed probation can ask the court to seal their records, but essentially they have to go in and they have to prove that they've been rehabilitated, have a job, or are going to school, or are self-sufficient in some other kind of way. And then the fourth thing that we have available is a pardon, which is very difficult to get, and it depends on who the governor is really at any given moment in terms of what their attitude is towards pardons. But a pardon is another record that can be sealed in Nebraska. And so I recommend to our clients that they get set-asides as a step to a pardon, because that may look good to the pardon board, and then ask for a pardon, which is a long and difficult process. Nebraska is probably 1 year behind on their pardon application. And people with petty misdemeanors are waiting 1 year to 2 to 3 years to get those things pardoned so that they can get their records sealed and get a job. In terms of our processes, we can e-file all of our documents, but they have to be petitions or motions asking the court to set aside or seal, and there always will be a hearing. So what we like to do is we like to have most of our clients do this pro se, because our experience is the courts are very willing to set aside a criminal conviction, and they're very willing to seal a dismissed criminal charge. As Cynthia mentioned, the one thing that a prosecutor will always object to is a crime of domestic violence. And if they object, then it's up to the judge, and you have to make a pretty good case to get a DV charge sealed. The other remedy that we have in Nebraska is if you're a victim of human trafficking at any point in time and have committed crimes of solicitation or prostitution, you can ask to have those records sealed, even if there's a conviction. So those are the only convictions in Nebraska outside of juvenile court orders that can be sealed. And that's a short summary.
Great, thank you very much. I understand that Jamie is with us by phone. She was having trouble with her video. Jamie, oh, now she's not having trouble with her video anymore. There she is. Okay, Jamie, I ask you the same question then. What do you have available in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania? And at least before COVID-19? Okay, you all right? You're right.
Mhm.
You're right. You're right.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Maybe if we mute our microphone.
Yeah, you're echoing. You're echoing. Okay.
Can you
Nope.
hear me now?
Now we can hear you.
Yes? Okay. Sorry, everybody, for all the technical problems. Our internet has been very slow and trying lots of different strategies to get on, but I'm glad it's working now just in time. Here in Philadelphia and in Pennsylvania, before COVID-19, we had a few different ways of clearing up someone's record. We have a sealing process, an expungement process, and part of our sealing process is done automatically through a law you might have heard of called Clean Slate. Pennsylvania was the first state in the country to pass a Clean Slate law that automated the sealing of a lot of different types of records, including non-conviction records, as well as some old and minor misdemeanor convictions. And so that process has been going on since last June in terms of tackling old cases that meet the criteria and automatically sealing them, and is continuing to move going forward as well. And then in addition, we still have petition-based processes. We have both expungement petitions that we can still file, which is mostly for non-conviction records. And then we also have sealing by petition for certain types of more serious misdemeanors that can't be sealed through the automated process. We also have petitions to vacate certain records that are the result of prostitution or related offenses that arose from a situation involving sexual exploitation. And then finally, we also have a pardon process, which is currently the only way to get any kind of felony off of your record in Pennsylvania. And if you're successful with a pardon, you still then have to go ahead and file a petition to have that expunged. So there are a lot of different remedies, and some happen automatically and some you need to file for. Our filing system in Philadelphia is an e-filing system, but there is still a fair amount of paperwork that goes into the process of producing the orders and sending them to the various law enforcement repositories. So, you know, there is some part of that process that is not automated right now, and we can talk a little bit more about some of the challenges that poses to try to push petition-based filing forward during the COVID times.
Okay, thanks everyone. That laid a groundwork at least for the examples of 3 different states, so that we can sort of use you to see how life has changed since this pandemic hit. What's happening now in your states? What's happening, or more accurately, what's not happening? Has the shutdown caused things to come to a halt, or have the courts found ways, any workarounds? Cynthia, you want to start us off?
Sure. So here in Cook County, the courts have been shut down since about mid-March, with the exception of emergency cases. So expungement and sealing petitions are completely at a standstill right now. That is pretty much true throughout the state because we do have a statewide stay-at-home order. I don't know exactly what's going on in the other counties, but it does appear that they have pretty much shut down as well. We at Cabrini Green Legal Aid, however, we are still accepting clients, and we are processing their petitions and generating a huge stack that will be ready to process once the courts reopen. But we already had a huge backlog in Cook County because it is the largest county, and because of the archaic methods that we're using, there grew to be a backlog of about a year's wait just to get into court if there is an objection. So we're bracing for the onslaught after the stay is lifted. We know that it's going to be pretty bad.
Okay. Muirne, what about Nebraska? What's happening there at the moment? Oh, we lost your audio.
There we go. It's really a patchwork across the state. Our largest county is Douglas County, and that's where I'm located. And the courthouse, well, the virus accomplished what we couldn't accomplish, which was to get the courthouse closed for a period of time. However, the courts have adapted very well, and they continue to, the district courts continue to hold hearings through WebEx meetings, and we continue to take applications and assist people with drafting their petitions and or their motions and getting those filed. And then they can either make an appearance by WebEx, or if the court is still open, they make an appearance in person. What we're not doing, what we used to do, and I don't know if we'll ever do again in our new normal, is we used to have community clinics where we would go out with volunteer attorneys and have a set aside or a sealing clinic, and would be able to handle a slew of petitions and motions in any given day. And we were lucky to have our prosecutors in our two largest cities join us and review petitions on site. And they could agree or disagree right then. If they agreed, they would take the petition, they would file it, they would get the order to the judge, and the judge would sign the order. So it was a very nice working relationship, and who knows what this new normal is going to be, but it's difficult to see us holding clinics like we used to hold, unless everybody's masked and gloved and whatever else one has to do to survive out in the public with this new virus. So I think things have gone actually very well, and the courts have adapted. I'll be very unhappy if we're not able to return to our clinic model.
Okay, thank you. Jamie, why don't you tell us about what's happening in Philadelphia?
Sure. So Philadelphia, everything got shut down in the middle of March. And our courts closed pretty fast, which, was good for public safety reasons. But pretty early on, it was clear that all of our system actors, the DA's office, the defenders, the courts, were all very rightly focused on the issue of trying to get people out of prison. And it actually took quite some time to get a working process for that up and running, and it's still kind of moving more slowly than I think people would like. So pretty much all of the resources in our criminal court systems were focused on that. And so we felt kind of early on that we didn't want to push too much about the expungements in light of that. But we also checked in with our state court system to ask whether our clean program would still be running, whether cases would still be getting automatically sealed during this time, and we got an answer that yes, our administrative office of Pennsylvania courts could keep running clean slate lists, but the counties would still have to sign off on it, which we've recently learned that all but just a couple of counties have been continuing to process those lists. So that's just kind of a plug for the importance of automating these things at the computer level as much as possible, is that we've still been able to get, I think it was like 1 million cases sealed in the past month, even with all of the courts closed. So that's been really huge. But recently, our courts just the closures got extended until June. And our Supreme Court has recently released an order saying, yes, still focus on the emergency stuff, but we have to start moving forward in terms of opening up other types of proceedings too. And so we're starting to initiate conversations with various stakeholders, including the DA's office that's been supportive of getting some sort of expungement and sealing petition process moving forward. Again, even in the beginning, we need to limit it to more urgent circumstances. So we know that some of our clients are trying to find jobs right now. So yeah, all of our clients are going to face challenges down the road if a recession comes. But I have a client right now who's trying to get a job as a healthcare worker and is being held up because of a record that could be sealed by a petition. And also with housing being so unstable right now, there are real needs that people have to get their records cleared today. And so we're starting to try to make that case a little bit more forcefully and get our courts to set up a process that can work. There are some challenges which we can talk more about in terms of the paper pushing components and getting the records actually cleared from all the law enforcement databases and pieces like that that we're going to need to try to figure out. But we're starting to really have those conversations now that it looks like we're not returning to our normal anytime soon here in Philadelphia.
Right. Jamie, why don't you just follow up a little bit? It was interesting to me to hear Muirne talk about what's happened to clinics and the inability to hold community clinics. And I also hope that we'll be able to go back to them, because I do think there's value to the face-to-face interaction. But Jamie, if you could just talk a little bit about the virtual clinics that you ran the last couple months.
Yeah, so when everything was getting shut down here in Philadelphia, it was literally in the middle of our busiest clinic season. We had 2 clinics on one Saturday and the following Saturday, right when everything got shut down, that we had to cancel. And we were really sad about them because we'd been planning them for many months. But in the wake of that, we didn't want to kind of leave all of our community partners high and dry, and obviously clients who needed the services high and dry. So we created a simple virtual clinic form. It's just a Google form that asks a few basic questions, biographical information, and then, where is your record located? The type of information we would need to be able to pull somebody's record in the court system. And we sent it out through our community partners. And we did one right in March when everything shut down and got about like 35 or so responses. We opened another round of clinics in April, and with the help of some financial support from some grants, we were able to do some Facebook advertising for the virtual clinic. And over the course of one weekend, we got 85 people signed up on the web form. So then we had to shut down the ad right away because that was a little overwhelming. But just a tip, if you have to do virtual clinics and it only costs like $40 to run the ads for 2 days and get that many people signed up. So that could be a new strategy in our current environment. So we've been able to get a lot of folks in the door through that way. And it's nice to be able to still share that resource with community partners, even if we can't be there in person. So we've been taking in those cases, and now hopefully we'll be able to move forward with at least filing some of them in the not too distant future.
So, we've been talking quite a bit here, and you've heard Rebecca talk about, we've all sort of recognized the need for record clearing, even more so as a result of COVID-19. Do you see your courts and your DAs having more bandwidth to address the criminal records issue, or perhaps you see them having less bandwidth to deal with it and resources to deal with this once the frantic pace of decarceration and the push towards decarceration lessens? Let's start with Muirne this time.
Well, I think in general, there's going to be an explosion of cases, June or July. And in addition to record sealing cases. So we're going to see evictions go up. We're going to see all of our victims of domestic violence who were unable to get help during the crisis come out looking for help. So I think the calendars are going to be jammed to the hilt. But I do believe that our clients will continue to be able to get hearings scheduled in front of judges. They may have to wait longer in order to do that. And that they'll be able to appear and make their case basically themselves. But I think that's what's going on here.
Okay. Cynthia, what about in Chicago?
Well, as I explained, we were already pretty log jammed to begin with, just because of our process. So we expect it to be just as bad and much worse even. However, we're a bit optimistic in that this may be momentum to really trigger some innovative ways to try to get rid of this humongous backlog that we know that we're going to be facing. The Cook County State's Attorney, Kim Fox, has been very supportive of record clearing, automatic record clearing for the cannabis offenses. We are working with them to determine which kinds of offenses are they most likely to object to, which ones they aren't. We may be able to do something to streamline those that are not really controversial through a lot faster. So we're seeing this as an opportunity to move a little bit closer towards maybe some automatic record clearing, or at least setting the stage for identifying those types of offenses that could be eligible for it once we're able to move towards that technology.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Jamie, what do you think in Philadelphia? You're muted. Do you think the courts here are going to have bandwidth and resources to? Can you hear us? No, you're muted. No. Let's see if she can get on that way. Otherwise, I'll answer the question for her. I'm in Philadelphia.
Sure.
No, we can't hear you. All right, so while she's trying to join us again, I will say that we definitely have a district attorney who is sympathetic to record clearing. He's got staff devoted to the expungement process. We certainly have some judges, some not, who are sympathetic to the record clearing process. I am very concerned, though, that resources are going to be sharply curtailed as a result of COVID-19. I mean, I think not only is there going to be a backlog of cases of all sorts, I also just think there's going to be significant financial constraints and loss of resources in the courts. So I just think that, you know, in Philadelphia, like a lot of places, it's going to be really important to message the importance of record clearing, the heightened importance of it, to message it in good ways, to find partners who can really advocate with us on behalf of record clearing and the need for record clearing. I generally think that it's going to be very challenging, and it's just like everything, we're all going to be sort of positioning ourselves as best we can to try to help these extremely vulnerable clients. Jamie, are you back on? No. Can't hear Jamie. What I'd like to do at this point, since it's just about 3 o'clock, is get Rebecca back on. See, you know, maybe ask a question or two of Rebecca that we've asked here in terms of, can you hear us, Rebecca? Can we hear you? No, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you. So Rebecca, we don't yet have any questions from the audience, I believe. So if you've got any questions for any of the panelists or Rebecca, or comments are fine too. Please feel free to type them into the chat box now. And in the meantime, Rebecca, I just want to follow up with you, since you're the advocacy person here. What advocacy partners do you see as being really important for all of us to be turning to keep this question alive and for criminal record clearing not to become a back burner issue?
Yeah, it's such a great question, Janet. I really appreciate the way that you sort of phrased that. So I think for all the reasons that we've all been talking about for the past, you know, I guess almost hour at this point, this group of people who have been impacted by the justice system and their families, right? Not just the people themselves, but their families too, are one of the things that policymakers need to be hearing about every day. To be centering them in the policy response. And so I just want to sort of say that first and foremost. I think the second piece of that, and Janet, your question is really...
Jamie, I think we're hearing something you said a while ago now. Sounds like Jamie. Okay.
I'll just give her a second. Okay, I think we're okay. Jamie, I feel for you. I'm in the same boat. I'm not even at my own house, but I'm staying out right now because of tech issues. So tech people who can figure this out, whatever you're doing, great. There are many of us who can't figure it out, and thank you for bearing with us. Love to you, Jamie. I think that, Janet, your question is exactly right, though, about who should we be working with, because it can't just be people who are the direct service providers. It can't just be people who are kind of the criminal justice reform community. It can't just be the anti-poverty community. This needs to be part and parcel of the broader kind of economic agenda and broader kind of intersectional agenda that people are pushing for as progressives. It also needs to be part of the agenda that people understand should have and can have, and I would say optimistically, but I think realistically will have bipartisan support because of the pre-existing bipartisan alliances that are incredibly strange bedfellows when it comes to, say, record clearing, for example. And Clean Slate is a great example of that in Pennsylvania. The Center for American Progress, I can guarantee you, doesn't agree with Koch Industries on anything else. But on Clean Slate, we pretty much see eye to eye, and we're both backing that Pennsylvania bill that became law that now has kicked off momentum in a whole range of red and blue and purple states alike. So the Clean Slate initiative, which I am also affiliated with in addition to the Center for American Progress, is working to support states behind the scenes in getting kind of the technical assistance, the strategic support that they need to automate their record clearing systems, with really the goal of automating as much in the way of eligible records as possible in states that are interested in taking this up. So I share that in this moment because what we are hearing from the states is a lot of interest among state lawmakers who were committed to this before this moment. They are saying they get it and they understand this needs to be part of the list that when state legislatures resume, they are seeing as part of today's work, not pushed off to the next session. And I think that's a message people need to be hearing loud and clear. I put in the slides that are going to get circulated a list of other policies that are really important right now. I want to name a couple of them just because they're so important for folks to have front of mind. And that includes fair chance licensing, so that occupational licensing restrictions that states have control over are not blocking people from being able to work in jobs that they're qualified and trained for. Subsidized employment has a huge role to play in a moment like this. Was one of the show-stopping, most effective remedies we had in the Great Recession, specifically and especially for people with records. That's something that states can do, but that the federal government needs to do as well, and that we're seeing some momentum in the Senate for, hopefully on a bipartisan basis. And then remedies like fair chance hiring, ban the box, those kinds of things are going to be really important too. So that's part of why we need to be continuing to sound the alarm and work with people that we might not agree with on much else in this moment, across sectors, across fields, across stakeholder communities, to say this needs to be on the bipartisan agenda.
Okay, thanks very much. Do Muirne, Cynthia, and Jamie, do you have anything to add to the question about who you see as essential partners to advocate with?
No, nothing to add.
All right, Jamie, can you hear us? No, we may have lost Jamie.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay, sorry again, everybody. I'm on my phone now, so you can't see me, but I can still talk.
That's okay. I don't see any questions from the audience. I'm going to give it one more minute, but a lot of our attendees are signing off. Our hour is up.
Hi, Janet. We have plenty of questions from the audience if you want me to ask some of them.
Yeah.
So we're getting some practical questions for the panel. Things like how's everyone dealt with client interactions, such as getting signatures?
It's a tough one. I'll just speak for Nebraska. I mean, basically, we've been able to, there's an electronic signature law that was passed as part of the COVID-19 measures that went through on Nebraska state. But because we're able to communicate with our clients mostly through email, we're doing PDFs. So clients sign, scan if they can, and send us back PDFs.
And at Cabrini Green Legal Aid, we are discussing a contract with DocuSign to help us with that electronic signatures.
This is Jamie. At CLS, we do have an app that allows us to send documents to clients for an electronic signature that does not require them to have a scanner. So that's been helpful, although it does require some tech savvy on the part of the client to be able to do. So not everybody is going to be comfortable or have the technological tools to do that. So we actually still have staff who are outfitted in their houses with printers and mail and paper and stamps to be able to send documents to clients the old-fashioned way as well. So we're kind of taking it the client's lead in terms of what their comfort level is and what works best for them.
And Jamie, we have a lot of questions for you about the virtual clinic. So people are wanting to know really the operations of that. What kind of Google Doc do you use? Can you share that? Can you share the forms that you provide to people, and talk a little bit more about what happened with the ads, how many people responded, just generally speaking about the strategy and procedures there.
Sure. So the Google form was extremely simple to make. I think anybody on this webinar could do it. You just go to Google Forms and put in the questions you would want somebody to answer. I turned it into a bit.ly link just so that it was short and easy to plop onto a flyer. And then also put it into email, and we put it on our social media. And so we just kind of started circulating it that way. And the nice thing about using the Google form is that as people fill it out, it auto-populates a Google spreadsheet. So you don't have to do any sort of rote data entry on the front end. So as people were signing up, it was just populating a spreadsheet. Jessa, who's helping us coordinate this wonderful webinar today, also helped us coordinate our spreadsheet. And we were able to basically just have our whole team go in and pick out cases to screen. We had different categories for various outcomes within the spreadsheet. And as we kind of moved through it, we were able to see, okay, these are cases we're going to open full intakes on. We're able to send those to our intake paralegals to do our full intake process on. If there are cases where we really couldn't do very much to help somebody with their record, we can send them quick emails just advising them about what their rights might be or giving them some basic information about their situation. So that's been kind of the operational side of how we've been handling the cases as they're coming in. The nice thing about using Google spreadsheets is that the whole team can be looking at it at once and everybody can be entering information together. It's really easy to use remotely, so that's been working pretty well. In terms of the ads, I'm not sure all of the details about how the ads actually get put up. Katie, I don't know if you know more about that and want to jump in on that point.
Sure. Yeah. So we have found that ads through Facebook in particular are much more effective. On Facebook, you can target your ads to people in your state, and you can specifically target people who are looking for work, which has been very effective for us and has been much more cost effective than other types of online advertising for us. So as Jamie already mentioned, we only spent about $42 to get 80 people to sign up, which is a very effective ratio. Of getting people to actually engage with you. So Facebook can be a little finicky. So if you have somebody at your organization who is in communications who can kind of develop some expertise in that, because Facebook will reject ads that they think are targeting people in a negative way. So if you say something like, do you have a criminal record? They won't let you post that ad. So you do have to kind of work with Facebook and kind of learn what they do. But we, for our expungement clinics, we just have somebody internally, an internal communications person who actually puts up those ads for us, and they've been very successful.
One quick follow-up question, I guess, to the panelists coming out of the question about the virtual clinics. They kind of presuppose the ability to get criminal records and to review criminal records, which not everybody can do electronically or online. Muirne and Cynthia, are your records, how do you get background checks in Cook County and in Nebraska? Are the central repositories open? And if they are, how would you get someone's record?
Cynthia, you want to go ahead?
Sure, I'll go first. In Cook County, in Chicago in particular, in order to file a petition, the petitioners have to get their paper rap sheet from the local police department. They are still open for business, but we've been reluctant to just insist that people go there if they don't feel comfortable. Those that do, they can email or upload their rap sheet so that we can move ahead with their petitions. Those who cannot, we are able to research their records because we do have remote access to the Cook County system as well as most of the other counties in Illinois. So we can do the research and determine eligibility and advise those who will need a rap sheet of what they will be eligible for once they're able to obtain their rap sheets. The remote access to the Cook County system prior to COVID-19 had been limited to special permission from the chief judge. But because of the pandemic, it is now opened up to any licensed attorney in the county. So remote access is now available to do the research, just can't move forward with the petitions without that rap sheet.
And do you think that will stay the case after COVID-19? Do you think they'll allow them to continue remote access?
I do. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And Muirne, how do you get records in Nebraska?
In Nebraska, we've got access to the court's database. And so clients really have to give us very little information, dates of birth, their names, their aliases, and we're able to look up their records and tell from looking at the court database what records are going to be eligible for a set aside or to be sealed. So it's a great system.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Katie, are there other questions from the audience?
Absolutely. A lot of questions for Rebecca. People are very excited about your PowerPoint and would like a copy of it, and they're wondering where you get a lot of those statistics and whether those your sources can be shared.
Absolutely. So a couple of things, one of which can be sent immediately following today's presentation, and that's the slides that I spoke from. So the wizards of CLS have those, and I will leave it to you guys to share them with this group. All of the stats and the facts and figures that are in there are actually in a forthcoming fact sheet that the Clean Slate Initiative is going to be releasing in just about a week or so. In the meantime, just as sort of like the shorthand, if you're looking for this stuff, I can also send the CLS Wizards 3 bit.ly links that have all of the different facts and figures between them, so you guys can go and find them pretty easily. And then the last thing that I would suggest people go to in terms of resources on this stuff is cleanslate.initiative.org. If you go to research or resources, there's a whole bunch of stuff there, and also if you click on toolkit, there's a bunch of stuff there too, and it's very kind of broadly related to people with records and all the different research that makes the case for record clearing itself, in addition to Clean Slate. But excited to share with this group and the broader world the fact sheet that kind of makes the case about why we need a second chances response once that's released fairly soon.
Another question that is for most of the panel, any ideas generally about keeping clients coming in when your office closed?
Muirne,
well, that's kind of a tough one, but we have a centralized intake system, and it's a phone system. And so what's been interrupted, what the pandemic has done is interrupt a walk-in center that we had open 4 afternoons per week. So people could walk in with any legal problem if they were a self-represented litigant and sit down with an attorney and get some advice as to that phase in the litigation. So we're missing a lot of cases probably that could be set aside or could be sealed because we don't have our walk-in.
Oh, Muirne, you froze. Muirne's frozen. So Cynthia?
Yeah, so prior to COVID, and we do expect to return in a new fashion even after COVID, but we operated a help desk at the Daly Center, and where we assist, and in Markham, Illinois, where we assisted anywhere from 3,500 to 4,000 people a year. So when we had to shut down, of course, and the courts closed, that inspired us to expedite our implementation of online intakes. And so we have the mechanism, again, for people to continue to send those requests to us. So we are processing those. Similar to what Jamie talked about, the clinics, we used to have an annual countywide summit in Cook County in June, where hundreds of people would show up to get their records cleared. And of course, that has now been postponed to the fall. We are taking those applicants, and yesterday we had like 300. So we're still going to process those. And again, to the extent that we're able to prepare the petitions and have them ready for filing, we will. So people are still able to get in and get that service, which is why there's just going to be a floodgate when the courts reopen.
Right. Jamie, are you on? I want to speak to Philadelphia. Okay.
Yeah, and Janet can jump in too, because Janet's our intake maven at CLS, but we also have moved to a phone-based system for people to call in, and we're getting an online system for all of our different legal issues we handle off the ground as well. Our virtual clinics have been kind of our shortcut while all of those new systems were coming online to be able to quickly and easily kind of plug in with our clients and community partners. And so that's been kind of our most successful means to date of getting a lot of folks in the door. But now that we're getting our other intake systems up and running again, hopefully we'll start seeing more people coming in from a variety of different methods. And, I think one thing for all of us to think about is that even as courts start slowly reopening and things start slowly going back to normal, at least in places like Philadelphia and Chicago, it's probably going to be a really long time before we're doing in-person intake in huge amounts, and especially not those community-based clinics. So I think it's worth being kind of creative and thinking about new strategies for outreach with community partners and folks tapped in the communities where we work, to try to make sure we're still connecting with the folks who need our services over a period of probably months, if not longer, to be able to make sure we're still there for the folks who need us.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
And I think one last question for Rebecca. A question came in. Can you speak to a concern that the impending recession will lead to an uptick in crime and a more tough on crime public attitude, which could lead to worse policies on criminal justice and record clearing?
I hate to have to say that this person is totally right to see this coming. I think it's something we need to be proactive about and not catch ourselves flat-footed on. And so I think being aware of that is really important. I think that's something that not only do progressives need to be aware of and kind of thinking about and strategizing around amongst themselves, but also that bipartisan kind of real talk conversations around this and how we talk about this and how we refute those kinds of narratives and problematic paradigms that end up not only risking inaction on important policy measures like expanded record clearing and automation, but also which risk the potential for rollback of gains that we've already made, thinking especially of New York's bail reform backlash that is very fresh in many people's minds right now. So I would say that the important thing to know from the research is that record clearing and generally policies that help people move on with their lives and move past a criminal record and get jobs and housing, et cetera, are all associated with higher public safety. They are all associated with reduced recidivism. And so allowing someone logically, but also supported by the research, to move on with their life and get a decent paying job is what helps them avoid recidivism. It is what we know is actually the pro-public safety policy choice. That is a big part of why we've seen law enforcement be supportive of, and also conservative lawmakers be supportive of these types of policies in recent years. But those are going to be really important kind of research and talking points and fact points and proof points to be dusting off and keeping in all of our messaging right now, not just responsively, but also proactively, to remind people that as we think about ways to rebuild on the other side of this and the policy steps we need to take now, it is in the interest of not only our overall economic health, the overall economic recovery, and the impact on 70 million to 100 million Americans and their families. It is also incredibly important for our health as a society, and that includes avoiding the pathways right back to reincarceration, which I should note are also incredibly costly for states and localities in ways that were already driving massive reforms into carcerative measures in recent years. So really appreciate the question, and that's got to be an important part of the conversation in a proactive, head-on, and positive way.
Okay.
Okay, so we're getting some input from the audience about some software and different strategies that they've used for remote interaction with clients. Somebody has mentioned that they use LawYaw, LAWYAW, as a program that helps them get electronic signatures. Another person has offered that Adobe eSign is offering a 90-day free trial that will allow people to do e-signatures. And then we have a question just generally about, is there any other software, computer programs that anyone has been using either for outreach or virtual clinics or anything else that hasn't already been mentioned?
No.
Not that I know of. No.
This is Jamie. I'll just say stay tuned for our session next week to hear all about our Clean Slate Screening Project and how we use technology to be able to massively screen and advise people about their records. So that's just a plug for that. And we have another session in this series down the pike that's specifically about technological tools, where we'll cover a bunch of different possible ways to use technology to scale up your record clearing practice, including different programs that can help you with mass filing and drafting of petitions. So those were just a couple of quick plugs for some of the sessions coming down the pike.
Okay, well, I want to thank everybody so much for joining us. It was great to hear both the advocacy part and the practitioner part. Again, I hope you will all join us next week, same bat time, same bat channel, for our session on our Clean Slate Clearing Project. And I think, I don't know if most of you are on our mailing list for the National Clean Slate Clearing Project. If you have any interest in being added to it, if you're a practitioner who does record clearing, feel free to email me, and I can get you put on the website. My email address is is there a way to put it? I should have had it put up somewhere, but Ginzberg, JGINZBERG @clspila.org, and I'll be happy to add you to our listserv. Stay safe, everyone. Stay healthy. Thanks again to Cynthia and Muirne and Rebecca and Jamie for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Janet. Thanks, Vallas.